Section 11 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Monastic Life. The Venerable Bede has given us a very striking picture of monastic enormities in his epistle to Egbert. From this we learn that many young men who had no title to the monastic profession got possession of monasteries, where, instead of engaging in the defence of their country as their age and rank required, they indulged themselves in the most dissolute indolence. We learn from Dugdale that in the reign of Henry II, the nuns of Amesbury Abbey in Wiltshire were expelled from that religious house on account of their incontinence. And to exhibit in the most lively colours the total corruption of monastic chastity, Bishop Burnet informs us, in his History of the Reformation, that when the nunneries were visited by the command of Henry VIII, whole houses almost were found whose vows had been made in vain. When we consider to what oppressive indolence, to what a variety of wretchedness and guilt the young and fair inhabitants of the cloister were frequently betrayed, we ought to admire those benevolent authors who, when the tide of religious prejudice ran very strong in favour of monastic virginity, had spirit enough to oppose the torrent, and to caution the devout and tender sex against so dangerous a profession. It is in this point of view that the character of Erasmus appears with the most amiable lustre, and his name ought to be eternally dear to the female world in particular. Though his studies and constitution led him almost to idolize those eloquent fathers of the Church who have magnified this kind of life, his good sense and his accurate survey of the human race enabled him to judge of the misery in which female youth was continually involved by a precipitate choice of the veil. He knew the successful arts by which the subtle and rapacious monks inveigled young women of opulent families into the cloister, and he exerted his lively and delicate wit in opposition to so pernicious an evil. In those nations of Europe where nunneries still exist, how many lovely victims are continually sacrificed to the avarice or absurd ambition of inhuman parents! The misery of these victims has been painted with great force by some benevolent writers of France. In most of those pathetic histories that are founded on the abuse of convents, the misery originates from the parent and falls upon the child. The reverse has sometimes happened, and there are examples of unhappy parents who have been rendered miserable by the religious perversity of a daughter. In the 14th volume of that very amusing work, Les Causes Célèbres, a work which is said to have been the favourite reading of Voltaire, there is a striking history of a girl under age who was tempted by pious artifice to settle herself in a convent in express opposition to parental authority. Her parents, who had in vain tried the most tender persuasion, endeavoured at last to redeem their lost child by a legal process against the nunnery in which she was imprisoned. The pleadings on this remarkable trial may perhaps be justly reckoned amongst the finest pieces of eloquence that the lawyers of France have produced. Monsieur Gillet, the advocate for the parents, represented in the boldest and most affecting language the extreme baseness of this religious seduction. His eloquence appeared to have fixed the sentiments of the judges. But the cause of superstition was pleaded by an advocate of equal power, and it finally prevailed. The unfortunate parents of Maria Vernal, for this was the name of the unfortunate girl, were condemned to resign her forever, and to make a considerable payment to those artful devotees who had piously robbed them of their child. When we reflect on the various evils that have arisen in convents, we have the strongest reason to rejoice and glory in that reformation by which the nunneries of England were abolished. Yet it would not be candid or just to consider all these as the mere harbours of licentiousness, since we are told that, at the time of their suppression, some of our religious houses were very honourably distinguished by the purity of their inhabitants. The visitors, says Bishop Burnet, interceded earnestly for one nunnery in Oxfordshire, where there was great strictness of life, and to which most of the young gentlewomen of the country were sent to be bred, so that the gentry of the country desired the king would spare the house, yet all was ineffectual. Degrees of sentimental attachment at different periods. In the earlier ages, sentiment in love does not appear to have been much attended to. When Abraham sent his servant to court a bride for his son Isaac, we do not so much as hear that Isaac was consulted on the matter, nor is there even a suspicion that he might refuse or dislike the wife which his father had selected for him. From the manner in which Rebecca was solicited, we learn that women were not then courted in person by the lover, but by a proxy, whom he or his parents deputed in his stead. We likewise see that this proxy did not, as in modern times, endeavour to gain the affection of the lady he was sent to, by enlarging on the personal properties and mental qualifications of the lover, but by the richness and magnificence of the presents he made to her and her relations. Presents have been from the earliest ages, and are to this day, the mode of transacting all kinds of business in the East. When a favour is to be asked of a superior, one cannot hope to obtain it without a present. Courtship, therefore, having been anciently transacted in this manner, it is plain that it was only considered in the same light as any other negotiable business, and not as a matter of sentiment and of the heart. In the courtship, however, or rather purchase of a wife by Jacob, we meet with something like sentiment. For when he found that he was not possessed of money or goods equal to the price which was set upon her, he not only condescended to purchase her by servitude, but even seemed much disappointed when the tender-eyed Leah was faithlessly imposed upon him instead of the beautiful Rachel. The ancient Gauls, Germans, and neighbouring nations of the north had so much veneration for the sex in general, that in courtship they behaved with a spirit of gallantry, and showed a degree of sentiment to which those who called them barbarians never arrived. Not contented with getting possession of the person of his mistress, a northern lover could not be satisfied without the sincere affection of her heart. Nor was his mistress ever to be gained but by such methods as plainly indicated to her the tenderest attachment from the most deserving man. The women of Scandinavia were not to be courted but by the most assiduous attendance, seconded by such warlike achievements as the custom of the country had rendered necessary to make a man deserving of his mistress. On these accounts, we frequently find a lover accosting the object of his passion by a minute and circumstantial detail of his exploits and all his accomplishments. "We fought with swords," says King Regner, in a beautiful ode composed by himself, in memory of the deeds of his former days, "that day wherein I saw 10,000 of my foes rolling in the dust, near a promontory of England. A dew of blood distilled from our swords. The arrows which flew in search of the helmets bellowed through the air. The pleasure of that day was truly exquisite. We fought with swords. A young man should march early to the conflict of arms. Man should attack man or bravely resist him. In this has always consisted the nobility of the warrior. He who aspires to the love of his mistress ought to be dauntless in the clash of swords." The descendants of the northern nations, long after they had plundered and repeopled the greatest part of Europe, retained nearly the same ideas of love, and practised the same methods in declaring it that they had imbibed from their ancestors. "Love," says William of Montagnegout, "engages to the most amiable conduct. Love inspires the greatest actions. Love has no will but that of the object beloved, nor seeks anything but what will augment her glory. You cannot love nor ought to be beloved, if you ask anything that virtue condemns. Never did I form a wish that could wound the heart of my beloved, nor delight in a pleasure that was inconsistent with her delicacy." The method of addressing females among some of the tribes of American Indians is the most simple that can possibly be devised. When the lover goes to visit his mistress, he only begs leave by signs to enter her hut. After obtaining this, he goes in and sits down by her in the most respectful silence. If she suffers him to remain there without interruption, her doing so is consenting to his suit. If, however, the lover has anything given him to eat and drink, it is a refusal, though the woman is obliged to sit by him until he has finished his repast. He then retires in silence. In Canada, courtship is not carried on with that coy reserve and seeming secrecy which politeness has introduced among the inhabitants of civilized nations. When a man and woman meet, though they never saw each other before, if he is captivated by her charms, he declares his passion in the plainest manner, and she with the same simplicity answers yes or no without further deliberation. That female reserve, says an ingenious writer, Dr. Alexander, that seeming reluctance to enter into the married state, observable in polite countries, is the work of art and not of nature. The history of every uncultivated people amply proves it. It tells us that their women not only speak with freedom the sentiments of their hearts, but even blush not to have these sentiments made as public as possible. In Formosa, however, they differ so much from the simplicity of the Canadians that it would be reckoned the greatest indecency in the man to declare, or in the woman to hear, a declaration of the passion of love. The lover is, therefore, obliged to depute his mother, sister, or some female relation, and from any of these the soft tale may be heard without the least offence to delicacy. In Spain, the women had formerly no voice in disposing of themselves in matrimony. But as the empire of common sense began to extend itself, they began to claim a privilege, at least of being consulted in the choice of the partners of their lives. Many fathers and guardians, hurt by this female innovation and puffed up with Spanish pride, still insisted on forcing their daughters to marry, according to their pleasure, by means of duennas, locks, hunger, and even sometimes of poison and daggers. But as nature will revolt against every species of oppression and injustice, the ladies have for some time begun to assert their own rights. The authority of fathers and guardians begins to decline, and lovers find themselves obliged to apply to the affections of the fair, as well as to the pride and avarice of their relations. The nightly musical serenades of mistresses by their lovers are still in use. The gallant composes some love sonnets, as expressive as he can, not only of the situation of his heart, but of every particular circumstance between him and the lady, not forgetting to lard them with the most extravagant encomiums on her beauty and merit. These he sings in the night below her window, accompanied with his lute, or sometimes with a whole band of music. The more piercingly cold the air, the more the lady's heart is supposed to be thawed with the patient sufferance of her lover, who, from night to night, frequently continues his exercises for many hours, heaving the deepest sighs, and casting the most piteous looks towards the window, at which, if his goddess at last deigns to appear and drops him a curtsy, he is superlatively paid for all his watching. But if she blesses him with a smile, he is ready to run distracted. In Italy, the manner of addressing the ladies, so far as it relates to serenading, nearly resembles that of Spain. The Italian, however, goes a step farther than the Spaniard. He endeavours to blockade the house where his fair one lives, so as to prevent the entrance of any rival. If he marries the lady who cost him all this trouble and attendance, he shuts her up for life. If not, she becomes the object of his eternal hatred, and he too frequently endeavours to revenge by poison the success of his happier rival. In one circumstance relating to courtship, the Italians are said to be particular. They protract the time as long as possible, well knowing that even with all the little ills attending it, a period thus employed is one of the sweetest of human life. A French lover, with the word sentiment perpetually in his mouth, seems by every action to have excluded it from his heart. He places his whole confidence in his exterior air and appearance. He dresses for his mistress, dances for her, flutters constantly about her, helps her to lay on her rouge and to place her patches. He attends her round the whole circle of amusements, chatters to her constantly, whistles and sings and plays the fool with her. Whatever be his station, Everything gaudy and glittering within the sphere of it is called in to his assistance, particularly splendid carriages and tawdry liveries. But if, by the help of all these, he cannot make an impression on the fair one's heart, it costs him nothing but a few shrugs of his shoulders, 2 or 3 silly exclamations, and as many stanzas of some satirical song against her. And, as it is impossible for a Frenchman to live without an amour, he immediately betakes himself to another. There is hardly any such thing among people of fashion as courtship. Matters are generally so ordered by parents and guardians, that to a bride and bridegroom the day of marriage is often the second time of their meeting. In many countries, to be married in this manner would be reckoned the greatest of misfortunes. In France, it is little regarded. In the fashionable world, few people are greater strangers to or more indifferent about each other than husband and wife, and any appearance of fondness between them, or their being seen frequently together, would infallibly make them forfeit the reputation of the ton, and be laughed at by all polite company. On this account, nothing is more common than to be acquainted with a lady without knowing her husband, or visiting the husband without ever seeing his wife. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Ferreira. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Section 12. German Women. Of all the German females, the ladies of Saxony are the most amiable. Their persons are so superiorly charming and preferable in whatever can recommend them to be notice of mankind, that the German youth often visit Saxony in quest of companions for life. Exclusive of their beauty and comeliness of appearance, they are brought up in a knowledge of all those arts, both useful and ornamental, which are so brilliant in addition to their native attractions. But what chiefly enhances their value and gives it reality and duration is a sweetness of temper and festivity of disposition that never fail to endear them on a very slight acquaintance. To crown all, they are generally patterns of conjugal tenderness and fidelity. As they are commonly careful to improve their minds by reading and instructive conversation, they have no small share of facetiousness and ingenuity. From their innate liveliness, they are extremely addicted to all the gay kind of amusements. They excel in the allurements of dress and decoration, and are, in general, skilful in music. The character, however, of the women in most other parts of Germany, particularly of the Austrian, is very different from this. Notwithstanding the advantages of size and make, their looks and features, though not unsightly, betray a vacancy of that life and spirit, without which beauty is uninteresting, and, like a mere picture, becomes utterly void of that indication of sensibility, which alone can awaken a delicacy of feeling. As their education is conducted by the rules of the grossest superstition, and they are taught little else than set forms of devotion, they arrive to the years of maturity, uninstructed in the use of reason, and usually continue profoundly ignorant the remainder of their days, which are spent, or rather loitered away, in apathy and indolence. The principal happiness of the Austrian ladies of fashion consists in ruminating on the dignity of their birth and families, the antiquity of their race, the rank they hold, the respect attached to it, and the prerogatives they enjoy over the inferior classes, whom they treat with the utmost superciliousness, and hold in the most unreasonable contempt. In the meantime, their domestic affairs are condemned to the most unaccountable neglect. They dwell at home, careless of what passes there, and suffer disorder and confusion to prevail, without feeling the least uneasiness. Great frequenters of churches, their piety consists in the strictest conformity to all the externals of religion. They profess the most boundless belief in all the silly legends with which their treatises of devotion are filled, and these are the only books they ever read. The coldness of their constitution occasions a species of regulated gallantry, which is rather the effect of an opinion that it is an appendage of high life than the result of their natural inclination. It must at the same time be allowed that the Austrian women are endowed with a great fund of sincerity and candor, and though too much on the reserve and prone to keep at an unnecessary distance, are yet capable of the truest attachment, and always warm and zealous in the cause of those whom they have admitted to their friendship. Though the Germans are rather a dull and phlegmatic people, and not greatly enslaved by the warmer passions, Yet at the court of Vienna they are much given to intrigue, and an amour is so far from being scandalous, that a woman gains credit by the rank of her gallant, and is reckoned silly and unfashionable if she scrupulously adheres to the virtue of chastity. But such customs are more the customs of courts than of places less exposed to the temptation, and consequently less dissolute, and we are well assured that in Germany there are many women who do honor to humanity, not by chastity only, but also by a variety of other virtues. The ladies at the principal courts differ not much in their dress from the French and English. They are not, however, so excessively fond of paint as the former. At some courts they appear in rich furs, and all of them are loaded with jewels, if they can obtain them. The female part of the burghers' families, in many of the German towns, dress in a very different manner, and some of them inconceivably fantastic, as may be seen in many prints published in books of travels. But, in this respect, they are gradually reforming, and many of them make quite a different appearance in their dress from what they did 30 or 40 years ago. The inhabitants of Vienna lived luxuriously, a great part of their time being spent in feasting and carousing. In winter, when the different branches of the Danube are frozen over, and the ground covered with snow, the ladies take their recreation in sledges of different shapes, such as griffins, tigers, swans, scallop shells, etc. Here the lady sits, dressed in velvet lined with rich furs, and adorned with laces and jewels, hanging on her head a velvet cap. The sledge is drawn by one horse, stag, or other creature, set off with plumes of feathers, ribbons, and bells. As this diversion is taken chiefly in the night time, servants ride before the sledge with torches, and a gentleman, standing on the sledge behind, guides the horses. A view of matrimony in 3 different lights. The marriage life is always an insipid, a vexatious, or a happy condition. The first is, when 2 people of no taste meet together, upon such a settlement as has been thought reasonable by parents and conveyancers, from an exact valuation of the land and cash of both parties. In this case, the young lady's person is no more regarded than the house and improvements in purchase of an estate, but she goes with her fortune rather than her fortune with her. These make up the crowd or vulgar of the rich, and fill up the lumber of the human race, without beneficence towards those below them, or respect toward those above them, and lead a despicable, independent, and useless life, without sense of the laws of kindness, good nature, mutual offices, and the elegant satisfactions which flow from reason and virtue. The vexatious life arises from a conjunction of 2 people of quick taste and resentment, put together for reasons well known to their friends, in which especial care is taken to avoid, what they think the chief of evils, poverty, and ensure them riches with every evil besides. These good people live in a constant restraint before company, and when alone, revile each other's person and conduct. In company, they are in purgatory; when by themselves, in hell. The happy marriage is, where 2 persons meet, and voluntarily make choice of each other without principally regarding or neglecting the circumstances of fortune or beauty. They may still love in spite of adversity or sickness. The former we may in some measure defend ourselves from. The other is the common lot of humanity. Love has nothing to do with riches or state. Solitude, with the person beloved, has a pleasure, even in a woman's mind, beyond show or pomp. Betrothing and marriage. At a very early period, families who lived in a friendly manner fell upon a method of securing their children to each other by what is called in the sacred writings, betrothing. This was agreeing on a price to be paid for the bride, the time when it should be paid, and when she should be delivered into the hands of her husband. There were, according to the Talmudists, 3 ways of betrothing: the first by a written contract, the second by a verbal agreement accompanied with a piece of money, and the third by the parties coming together and living as husband and wife, which might as properly be called marriage as betrothing. The written contract was in the following manner. On such a day, month, year, A, the son of B, has said to D, the daughter of E, Be thou my spouse according to the law of Moses and of the Israelites, and I give thee as a dowry the sum of 200 sisums, as is ordered by our law. And the said D hath promised to be his spouse upon the conditions aforesaid, which the said A doth promise to perform on the day of marriage. And to this the said A doth hereby bind himself and all that he hath, to the very cloak upon his back, engages himself to love, honor, feed, clothe, and protect her, and to perform all that is generally implied in contracts of marriage in favor of the Israelitish wives. The verbal agreement was made in the presence of a sufficient number of witnesses, by the man saying to the woman, Take this money as a pledge that at such a time I will take thee to be my wife." A woman who was thus betrothed or bargained for was almost in every respect by the law considered as already married. Before the legislation of Moses, marriages among the Jews, say the rabbis, were agreed on by the parents and relations of both sides. When this was done, the bridegroom was introduced to his bride. Presents were mutually exchanged, the contract signed before witnesses, and the bride, having remained some time with her relations, was sent away to the habitation of her husband, in the night, with singing, dancing, and the sound of musical instruments. By the institution of Moses, the rabbis tell us the contract of marriage was read in the presence of and signed by at least 10 witnesses who were free and of age. The bride, who had taken care to bathe herself the night before, appeared in all her splendor, but veiled, in imitation of Rebekah, who veiled herself when she came in sight of Isaac. She was then given to the bridegroom by her parents, in words to this purpose: "Take her according to the law of Moses." And he received her by saying, "I take her according to that law." Some blessings were then pronounced on the young couple, both by the parents and the rest of the company. The blessings or prayers generally run in this style: "Blessed art thou, O Lord of heaven and earth, who hast created man in thine own likeness, and hast appointed woman to be his partner and companion. Blessed art thou, who fillest Zion with joy for the multitude of her children. Blessed art thou, who sendeth gladness to the bridegroom and his bride, who hast ordained for them love, joy, tenderness, peace, and mutual affection. Be pleased to bless not only this couple, but Judah and Jerusalem, with songs of joy, and praise for the joy that thou givest them, by the multitudes of their sons and of their daughters." After the virgins had sung a marriage song, the company partook of a repast, the most magnificent the parties could afford, after which they began a dance, the men round the bridegroom, the women round the bride. They pretended that this dance was of divine institution, and an essential part of the ceremony. The bride was then carried to the nuptial bed, and the bridegroom left with her. The company again returning to their feasting and rejoicing, and the rabbis inform us that this feasting, when the bride was a widow, lasted only 3 days, but 7 if she was a virgin. At the birth of a son, the father planted a cedar, and at that of a daughter he planted a pine. Of these trees the nuptial bed was consecrated, when the parties, at whose birth they were planted, entered into the married state. The Assyrians had a court, or tribunal, whose only business was to dispose of young women in marriage, and see the laws of that union properly executed. What these laws were, or how the execution of them was enforced, are circumstances that have not been handed down to us. But the erecting a court solely for the purpose of taking cognizance of them, suggests an idea that they were many and various. Among the Greeks, the multiplicity of male and female deities who were concerned in the affairs of love made the invocations and sacrifices on a matrimonial occasion a very tedious affair. Fortunate omens gave great joy, and the most fortunate of all others was a pair of turtles seen in the air, as those birds were reckoned the truest emblems of conjugal love and fidelity. If, however, one of them was seen alone, it infallibly denoted separation, and all the ills attending an unhappy marriage. On the wedding day, the bride and bridegroom were richly dressed, and adorned with garlands of herbs and flowers. The bride was conducted in the evening to the house of her husband in a chariot, seated between her husband and one of his relations. When she alighted from the chariot, the axletree of it was burnt, to show that there was no method for her to return back. As soon as the young couple entered the house, figs and other fruits were thrown upon their heads, to denote plenty, and a sumptuous entertainment was ready for them to partake of, to which all the relations on both sides were invited. The bride was lighted to bed by a number of torches, according to her quality, and the company returned in the morning to salute the new married couple, and to sing epithalamia at the door of their bedchamber. Epithalamia were marriage songs, anciently sung in praise of the bride or bridegroom, wishing them happiness, prosperity, and a numerous issue. Among the Romans there were 3 different kinds of marriage. The ceremony of the first consisted in the young couple eating a cake together, made only of wheat, salt, and water. The second kind was celebrated by the parties solemnly pledging their faith to each other, by giving and receiving a piece of money. This was the most common way of marrying among the Romans. It continued in use even after they became Christians. When writings were introduced to testify that a man and a woman had become husband and wife, and also that the husband had settled a dower upon his wife, these writings were called tabulae dotalis, dowry tablets, and hence, perhaps, the words, in our marriage ceremony, I thee endow. The third kind of marriage was, when a man and woman, having cohabitated for some time and had children, found it expedient to continue together. In this case, if they made up the matter between themselves, it became a valid marriage, and the children were considered as legitimate. Something similar to this is the present custom in Scotland. There, if a man live with and have children by a woman, though he do not marry her till he be upon his deathbed, all the children are thereby legitimated, and become entitled to the honours and estates of their father. The case is the same in Holland and some parts of Germany, with this difference only, that all the children to be legitimated must appear with the father and mother in church at the ceremony of their marriage. End of section 12.
Section 13 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Section 13. Female Friendship. It has long been a question, which of the two sexes is more capable of friendship? Montaigne, who is so much celebrated for his knowledge of human nature, has given it positively against the women, and his opinion has been generally embraced. Friendship, perhaps, in women is more rare than among men, but, at the same time, it must be allowed that where it is found, it is more tender. Men, in general, have more of the parade than the graces of friendship. They often wound while they serve, and their warmest sentiments are not very enlightened, with respect to those minute sentiments which are of so much value. But women have a refined sensibility, which makes them see everything. Nothing escapes them. They divine the silent friendship, they encourage the bashful or timid friendship, they offer the sweetest consolations to friendship in distress. Furnished with finer instruments, they treat more delicately a wounded heart. They compose it, and prevent it from feeling its agonies. They know, above all, how to give value to 1,000 things, which have no value in themselves. We ought therefore, perhaps, to desire the friendship of a man upon great occasions, but for general happiness we must prefer the friendship of a woman. With regard to female intimacies, it may be taken for granted that there is no young woman who has not, or wishes not to have, a companion of her own sex, to whom she may unbosom herself on every occasion. That there are women capable of friendship with women, few impartial observers will deny. There have been many evident proofs of it, and those carried as far as seemed compatible with the imperfections of our common nature. It is, however, questioned by some, while others believe that it happens exceedingly seldom. Between married and unmarried women, it no doubt happens very often. Whether it does so between those that are single is not so certain. Young men appear more frequently susceptible of a generous and steady friendship for each other than females as yet unconnected, especially if the latter have, or are supposed to have, pretensions to beauty, not adjusted by the public. In the frame and condition of females, however, compared with those of the other sex, there are some circumstances which may help towards an apology for this unfavorable feature in their character. The state of matrimony is necessary to the support, order, and comfort of society, but it is a state that subjects the women to a great variety of solicitude and pain. Nothing could carry them through it with any tolerable satisfaction or spirit, but very strong and almost unconquerable attachments. To produce these, is it not fit they should be peculiarly sensitive to the attention and regards of the men? Upon the same ground, does it not seem agreeable to the purposes of Providence, that the securing of this attention and these regards should be a principal aim? But can such an aim be pursued without frequent competition? And will not that too readily occasion jealousy, envy, and all the unamiable effects of mutual rivalship? Without the restraints of superior worth and sentiment, it certainly will. But can these be ordinarily expected from the prevailing turn of female education, or from the little pains that women as well as other human beings commonly take to control themselves and to act nobly? In this last respect, the sexes appear pretty much on the same footing. This reasoning is not meant to justify the indulgence of those little and sometimes base passions towards one another, with which females have been so generally charged. It is only intended to represent such passion in the first approach, and while not entertained, as less criminal than the men are apt to state them, and to prove that, in their attachments to each other, the latter have not always that merit above the women which they are apt to claim. In the meantime, let it be the business of the ladies, by emulating the gentlemen, where they appear good-natured and disinterested, to disprove their imputation, and to show a temper open to friendship as well as to love. To talk much of the latter is natural for both. To talk much of the former is considered by the men as one way of doing themselves honor. Friendship, they well know, is that dignified form which in speculation at least every heart must respect. But in friendship, as in religion, which on many accounts it resembles, speculation is often substituted in the place of practice. People fancy themselves possessed of the thing, and hope that others will fancy so too, because they are fond of the name, and have learned to talk about it with plausibility. Such talk indeed imposes, till experience give it the lie. To say the truth, there seems in either sex but little of what a fond imagination, unacquainted with the falsehood of the world, and warmed by affections which its selflessness has not yet chilled, would reckon friendship. In theory, the standard is raised too high. We ought not, however, to wish it much lower. The honest sensibilities of ingenuous natures should not be checked by the overcautious maxims of political prudence. No advantage, obtained by such frigidity, can compensate for the want of those warm effusions of the heart into the bosom of a friend, which are doubtless among the most exquisite pleasures. At the same time, however, it must be owned that they often, by the inevitable lot of humanity, make way for the bitterest pains which the breast can experience. Happy beyond the common condition of her sex is she who has found a friend indeed, open-hearted yet discreet, generously fervent yet steady, thoroughly virtuous but not severe, wise as well as cheerful. Can such a friend be loved too much, or cherished too tenderly? If to excellence and happiness there be any one way more compendious than another, next to friendship with the Supreme Being, it is this. But when a mixture of minds so beautiful and so sweet takes place, it is generally, or rather always, the result of early prepossession, casual intercourse, or, in short, a combination of such causes as are not to be brought together by management or design. This noble plant may be cultivated, but it must grow spontaneously. End of section 13.
On the Choice of a Husband by Anonymous. Section 14 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bellona Times. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Chapter 14. Assist me, ye nine, while the youth I define, with whom I in wedlock would class. And ye blooming fair, lend a listening ear, to approve of the man as you pass. Not the changeable fry, who love nor know why, but follow bedept by their passions. Such votaries as these are like waves of the seas, and steered by their own inclinations. The hectoring blade, how unfit for the maid, where meekness and modesty reigns. Such a blundering bully I'll speak against truly, whatever I get for my pains. Not the dogmatic elf, whose great all is himself, whose alone ipse dixit is law. What a figure he'll make, how like Momus he'll speak, with sneering burlesque, a pshaw, pshaw. Not the covetous wretch, whose heart's at full stretch to gain an inordinate treasure. Him leave with the rest, and such mortals detest, who sacrifice life without measure. The fluttering fop, how empty his top, nay, but some call him coxcomb, I trow. But 'tis losing your time, he's not worth half a rhyme, let the fag ends of prose bind his brow. The guttering sot, what a conduit his throat, how beastly and vicious his life. Where drunkards prevail, whole families fail, much more an affectionate wife. One character yet, I with sorrow repeat, and oh, that the number were less. 'Tis the blasphemous crew, what a pattern they'll shew to their hapless and innocent race. Let wisdom then shine in the youth that is mine, whilst virtue his footsteps impress. Such I'd choose for my mate, whether sooner or late. Tell me, ladies, what think you of this? The chief point to be regarded, says Lady Pennington in her advice to the daughters, is in the choice of a companion for life, is a really virtuous principle, an unaffected goodness of heart. Without this, you will be continually shocked by indecency, and pained by impiety. So numerous have been the unhappy victims to the ridiculous opinion, a reformed libertine makes the best husband, that, did not experience daily evince the contrary, one would believe it impossible for a girl who has a tolerable degree of common understanding to be made the dupe of so erroneous a position, which has not the least shadow of reason for its foundation, and which a small share of observation will prove to be false in fact. A man who has been conversant with the worst sort of women is very apt to contract a bad opinion of, and a contempt for, the sex in general. Incapable of esteeming any, he is suspicious of all, jealous without cause, angry without provocation. His own disturbed imagination is a continued source of ill humor. To this is frequently joined a bad habit of body, the natural consequence of an irregular life, which gives an additional sourness to the temper. What rational prospect of happiness can there be with such a companion? And that this is the general character of those who are called reformed rakes, observation will certify. But admit there may be some exceptions. It is a hazard upon which no considerate woman would venture the peace of her whole life. The vanity of those girls who believe themselves capable of working miracles of this kind, and who give up their persons to men of libertine principles, upon the wild expectation of reclaiming them, justly deserves the disappointment which it will generally meet with. For, believe me, a wife is, of all persons, the least likely to succeed in such an attempt. Be it your care to find that virtue in a lover which you must never hope to form in a husband. Good sense and good nature are almost equally requisite. If the former is wanting, it will be next to an impossibility for you to esteem the person of whose behavior you may have cause to be ashamed. Mutual esteem is as essential to happiness in the married state as mutual affection. Without the latter, every day will bring with it some fresh cause of vexation, until repeated quarrels produce a coldness, which will settle into an irreconcilable aversion, and you will become, not only each other's torment, but the object of contempt to your family, and to your acquaintance. This quality of good nature is, of all others, the most difficult to be ascertained, on account of the general mistake of blending it with good humor, as if they were in themselves the same; whereas, in fact, no two principles of action are more essentially different. But this may require some explanation. By good nature, I mean that true benevolence, which partakes in the felicity of every individual within the reach of his ability, which relieves the distressed, comforts the afflicted, diffuses blessings, and communicates happiness far as its sphere of action can extend; and which, in the private scenes of life, will shine conspicuous in the dutiful son, in the affectionate husband, the indulgent father, the faithful friend, and in the compassionate master, both to man and beast. Good humor, on the other hand, is nothing more than a cheerful, pleasing deportment, arising either from a natural gaiety of mind, or from an affection of popularity, joined to an affability of behavior, the result of good breeding, and from a ready compliance with the taste of every company. This kind of mere good humor is, by far, the most striking quality. It is frequently mistaken for, and complimented with, the superior name of real good nature. A man, by this specious appearance, has often acquired that appellation who, in all the actions of private life, has been a morose, cruel, vengeful, sullen, haughty tyrant. Let them put on the cap whose temples fit the galling wreath. A man of truly benevolent disposition, and formed to promote the happiness of all around him, may sometimes, perhaps, from an ill habit of body, an accidental vexation, or from a commendable openness of heart, above the meanness of disguise, be guilty of little sallies of peevishness, or of ill humour, which, carrying the appearance of ill nature, may be unjustly thought to proceed from it, by persons who are unacquainted with his true character, and who take ill humour and ill nature to be synonymous terms, though in reality they bear not the least analogy to each other. In order to the forming a right judgment, it is absolutely necessary to observe this distinction, which will effectually secure you from the dangerous error of taking the shadow for the substance, an irretrievable mistake, pregnant with innumerable consequent evils. From what has been said, it plainly appears that the criterion of this amiable virtue is not to be taken for the general opinion, mere good humour being, to all intents and purposes, sufficient in this particular, to establish the public voice in favour of a man utterly devoid of every humane and benevolent affection of heart. It is only from the less conspicuous scenes of life, the more retired sphere of action, from the artless tenor of domestic conduct, that the real character can, with any certainty, be drawn. These undisguised proclaim the man. But as they shun the glare of light, nor court the noise of popular applause, they pass unnoticed, and are seldom known till after an intimate acquaintance. The best method, therefore, to avoid the deception in this case is to lay no stress on outward appearances, which are too often fallacious, but to take the rule of judging from the simple, unpolished sentiments of those whose dependent connections give them undeniable certainty, who not only see, but who hourly feel, the good or bad effect of that disposition to which they are subjected. By this I mean, that if a man is equally respected, esteemed, and beloved by his dependents and domestics, you may justly conclude he has that true good nature, that real benevolence, which delights in communicating felicity, and enjoys the satisfaction it diffuses. But if by these he is despised and hated, served merely from a principle of fear, devoid of affection, which is ever easily discoverable, whatever may be his public character, however favorable the general opinion, be assured that his disposition is such as can never be productive of domestic happiness. I have been the more particular on this head, as it is one of the most essential qualifications to be regarded, and of all others the most liable to be mistaken. Never be prevailed with, my dear, to give your hand to a person defective in these material points. Secure a virtue of good nature and understanding in a husband, you may be secure of happiness. Without the two former it is unattainable. Without the latter, in a tolerable degree, it must be very imperfect. Remember, however, that infallibility is not the property of man, or you may entail disappointment on yourself, by expecting what is never to be found. The best men are sometimes inconsistent with themselves. They are liable to be hurried, by sudden starts of passion, into expressions and actions with which their cooler reason will condemn. They may have some oddities of behavior, and some peculiarities of temper. They may be subject to accidental ill humour, or to whimsical complaints. Blemishes of this kind often shade the brightest character, but they are never destructive of mutual felicity, unless when they are made so by an improper resentment, or by an ill-judged opposition. When cooled, and in his usual temper, the man of understanding, if he has been wrong, will suggest to himself all that could be urged against him. The man of good nature will, unupbraided, own his error. Immediate contradiction is, therefore, wholly unserviceable, and highly imprudent. An after repetition is equally unnecessary and injudicious. Any peculiarities in the temper or behavior ought to be properly represented in the tenderest and in the most friendly manner. If the representation of them is made discreetly, it will generally be well taken. But if they are so habitual as not easily to be altered, strike not too often upon the unharmonious string. Rather let them pass unobserved. Such a cheerful compliance will better cement your union, and they may be made easy to yourself, by reflecting on the superior good qualities by which these trifling faults are so greatly overbalanced. You must remember, my dear, these rules are laid down on the supposition of your being united to a person who possesses the three qualifications for happiness before mentioned. In this case, no farther direction is necessary, but that you strictly perform the duty of a wife, namely, to love, to honor, and obey. The two first articles are a tribute so indispensably due to merit, that they must be paid by inclination, and they naturally lead to the performance of the last, which will not only be easy, but a pleasing task, since nothing can ever be enjoined by such a person that is in itself improper, and a few things will, that can, with any reason, be disagreeable to you. The being united to a man of irreligious principles makes it impossible to discharge a great part of the proper duty of a wife. To name but one instance, obedience will be rendered impracticable by frequent injunctions inconsistent with, and contrary to, the higher obligations of morality. This is not a supposition, but is a certainty founded upon facts, which I have too often seen and can attest. Where this happens, the reasons for non-compliance ought to be offered in a plain, strong, good-natured manner. There is at least the chance of success from being heard; but should those reasons be rejected, or the hearing them refused, and silence on the subject enjoined, which is most probable, few people caring to hear what they know to be right, when they are determined not to be convinced by it, obey the injunction, and urge not the argument farther. Keep, however, steady to your principles, and suffer neither persuasion nor threats to prevail on you to act contrary to them. All commands repugnant to the laws of Christianity it is your indispensable duty to disobey. All requests that are inconsistent with prudence, or incompatible with the rank and character which you ought to maintain in life, it is your interest to refuse. A compliance with the former would be criminal, a consent to the latter highly indiscreet, and it might thereby subject you to general censure. For a man capable of requiring from his wife what he knows to be in itself wrong, is equally capable of throwing the whole blame of such misconduct on her, and of afterwards upbraiding her for a behavior to which he will, upon the same principle, disown that he has been accessory. Many similar instances have come within the compass of my own observation. In things of less material nature, that are neither criminal in themselves, nor pernicious in their consequences, always acquiesce, if insisted on, however disagreeable they may be to your own temper and inclination. Such a compliance will evidently prove that your refusal, in the other cases, proceeds not from a spirit of contradiction, but merely from a just regard to that superior duty which can never be infringed with impunity. As the want of understanding is by no art to be concealed, by no address to be disguised, it might be supposed impossible for a woman of sense to unite herself to a person whose defect in this instance must render that sort of rational society, which constitutes the chief happiness of such an union, impossible. Yet here, how often has the weakness of female judgment been conspicuous! The advantages of great superiority in rank or fortune have frequently proved so irresistible a temptation, as, in opinion, to outweigh not only the folly but even the vices of its possessor, a grand mistake, ever tacitly acknowledged by a subsequent repentance, when the expected pleasures of affluence equipage, and all the glittering pageantry, have been experimentally found insufficient to make amends for the want of that constant satisfaction which results from the social joy of conversing with a reasonable friend. But however weak this motive must be acknowledged, it is more excusable than another, which, I fear, has sometimes had an equal influence on the mind. I mean so great a love of sway as to induce her to give the preference to a person of weak intellectuals, in hopes of holding uncontrolled the reins of government. The expectation is, in fact, ill grounded. Obstinacy and pride are generally the companions of folly. The silliest people are often the most tenacious of their opinions, and consequently the hardest of all others to be managed. But admit the contrary, the principle is in itself bad. It tends to invert the order of nature, and to counteract the design of Providence. A woman can never be seen in a more ridiculous light than when she appears to govern her husband. If, unfortunately, the superiority of understanding is on her side, the apparent consciousness of that superiority betrays a weakness that renders her contemptible in the sight of every considerate person, and it may, very probably, fix in his mind a dislike never to be eradicated. In such a case, if it should ever be your own, remember that some degree of dissimulation is commendable, so far as to let your husband's defects appear unobserved. When he judges wrong, never flatly contradict, but lead him insensibly into another opinion, in so discreet a manner that it may seem entirely his own, and let the whole credit of every prudent determination rest on him, without indulging the foolish vanity of claiming any merit to yourself. Thus a person of but an indifferent capacity may be so assisted as, in many instances, to shine with borrowed lustre, scarce distinguishable from the native, and by degrees he may be brought into a kind of mechanical method of acting properly in all the common occurrences of life. Odd as this position may seem, it is founded in fact. I have seen the method successfully practised by more than one person, where a weak mind, on the governed side, has been so prudently set off as to appear the sole director, like the statue of the Delphic god, which was thought to give forth its own oracles, whilst the humble priest, who lent his voice, was by the shrine concealed, nor sought a higher glory than a supposed obedience to the power he would be thought to serve. End of Section 14.
Section 15 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. A Letter to a New Married Man. I received the news of your marriage with infinite delight, and hope the sincerity with which I wish you happiness may excuse the liberty I take in giving you a few rules, whereby more certainly to obtain it. I see you smile at my wrong-headed kindness, and, reflecting on the charms of your bride, cry out in a rapture, that you are happy enough without any rules. I know you are. But after one of the 40 years, which I hope you will pass pleasingly together, is over, this letter may come in turn, and rules for felicity may not be found unnecessary, however some of them may appear impracticable. Could that kind of love be kept alive through the marriage state, which makes the charm of a single one, the sovereign good would no longer be sought for. In the union of two faithful lovers it would be found. But reason shows that this is impossible, and experience informs us that it never was so. We must preserve it as long, and supply it as happily as we can. When your present violence of passion subsides, however, and a more cool and tranquil affection takes its place, be not hasty to censure yourself as indifferent, or to lament yourself as unhappy. You have lost that only which it was impossible to retain, and it were graceless amid the pleasures of a prosperous summer to regret the blossoms of a transient spring. Neither unwarily condemn your bride's insipidity till you have recollected that no object however sublime, no sounds however charming, can continue to transport us with delight when they no longer strike us with novelty. The skill to renovate the powers of pleasing is said indeed to be possessed by some women in an eminent degree; but the artifices of maturity are seldom seen to adorn the innocence of youth. You have made your choice, and ought to approve it. Satiety follows quickly upon the heels of possession, and to be happy, we must always have something in view. The person of your lady is already all your own, and will not grow more pleasing in your eyes, I doubt, though the rest of your sex will think her handsome for these dozen of years. Turn, therefore, all your attention to her mind, which will daily grow brighter by polishing. Study some easy science together, and acquire a similarity of tastes while you enjoy a community of pleasures. You will by this means have many images in common, and be freed from the necessity of separating to find amusement. Nothing is so dangerous to wedded love as the possibility of either being happy out of the company of the other. Endeavor, therefore, to cement the present intimacy on every side. Let your wife never be kept ignorant of your income, your expenses, your friendships or aversions. Let her know your very faults, but make them amiable by your virtues. Consider all concealment as a breach of fidelity. Let her never have anything to find out in your character. And remember that from the moment one of the partners turns spy upon the other, they have commenced a state of hostility. Seek not for happiness in singularity, and dread a refinement of wisdom as a deviation into folly. Listen not to those sages who advise you always to scorn the counsel of a woman, and if you comply with her requests, pronounce you to be wife-ridden. I said that the person of your lady would not grow more pleasing to you, but pray let her never suspect that it grows less so. That a woman will pardon an affront to her understanding much sooner than one to her person, is well known, nor will any of us contradict the assertion. All our attainments, all our arts, are employed to gain and keep the heart of man; and what mortification can exceed the disappointment, if the end be not obtained? There is no reproof however pointed, no punishment however severe, that a woman of spirit will not prefer to neglect; and if she can endure it without complaint, it only proves that she means to make herself amends by the attention of others for the slights of her husband. For this, and for every reason, it behooves a married man not to let his politeness fail, though his ardor may abate, but to retain at least that general civility towards his own lady which he is so willing to pay to every other, and not show a wife of 18 or 20 years old, that every man in company can treat her with more complaisance than he, who so often vowed to her eternal fondness. It is not my opinion that a young woman should be indulged in every wild wish of her gay heart or giddy head; but contradiction may be softened by domestic kindness, and quiet pleasures substituted in the place of noisy ones. Public amusements are not indeed so expensive as is sometimes imagined, but they tend to alienate the minds of married people from each other. A well-chosen society of friends and acquaintance, more eminent for virtue and good sense than for gaiety and splendor, where the conversation of the day may afford a comment for the evening, seems the most rational pleasure this great town can afford. That your own superiority should always be seen, but never felt, seems an excellent general rule. A wife should outshine her husband in nothing, not even in her dress. The bane of married happiness among the city men in general has been, that finding themselves unfit for polite life, they transferred their vanity to their ladies, dressed them up gaily, and sent them out a gallanting, while the good man was to regale with port wine or rum punch, perhaps among mean companions, after the compting house was shut. This practice produced the ridicule thrown on them in all our comedies and novels since commerce began to prosper. But now that I am so near the subject, a word or two on jealousy may not be amiss. For though not a failing of the present age's growth, yet the seeds of it are too certainly sown in every warm bosom for us to neglect it as a fault of no consequence. If you are ever tempted to be jealous, watch your wife narrowly, but never tease her. Tell her your jealousy, but conceal your suspicion. Let her, in short, be satisfied that it is only your odd temper, and even troublesome attachment, that makes you follow her. But let her not dream that you ever doubted seriously of her virtue, even for a moment. If she is disposed towards jealousy of you, let me beseech you to be always explicit with her, and never mysterious. Be above delighting in her pain, of all things; nor do your business nor pay your visits with an air of concealment, when all you are doing might as well be proclaimed perhaps in the parish vestry. But I hope better than this of your tenderness and your virtue, and will release you from a lecture you have so little need of, unless your extreme youth and my uncommon regard will excuse it. And now farewell. Make my kindest compliments to your wife, and be happy in proportion as happiness is wished you by, dear Sir, &c. Garrick's Advice to Married Ladies. Ye fair married dames who so often deplore That a lover once blest is a lover no more, attend to my counsel, nor blush to be taught That prudence must cherish what beauty has caught. The bloom on your cheek, and the glance of your eye, Your roses and lilies may make the men sigh; But roses and lilies and sighs pass away, And passion will die as your beauties decay. Use the man that you wed like your favorite guitar, Though music in both, they are both apt to jar. How tuneful and soft from a delicate touch, Not handled too roughly, nor played on too much. The sparrow and linnet will feed from your hand, Grow tame by your kindness, and come at command. Exert with your husband the same happy skill, For hearts, like your birds, may be tamed to your will. Be gay and good humored, complying and kind, Turn the chief of your care from your face to your mind. 'Tis thus that a wife may her conquests improve, And Hymen shall rivet the fetters of love. Section 16.
Of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Section 16. Origin of Nunneries. Soon after the introduction of Christianity, St. Mark is said to have founded a society called Therapeutes, who dwelt by the lake Moeris in Egypt, and devoted themselves to solitude and religious offices. About the year 305 of the Christian computation, St. Anthony, being persecuted by Diocletian, retired into the desert near the lake Moeris. Numbers of people soon followed his example, joined themselves to the Therapeutes, St. Anthony being placed at their head, and improving upon their rules. First formed them into regular monasteries, and enjoined them to live in mortification and chastity. About the same time, or soon after, St. Synclitica, resolved not to be behind St. Anthony in her zeal for chastity, is generally believed to have collected together a number of enthusiastic females, and to have founded the first nunnery for their reception. Some imagine the scheme of celibacy was concerted between St. Anthony and St. Synclitica, as St. Anthony, on his first retiring into solitude, is said to have put his sister into a nunnery, which must have been that of St. Synclitica. But however this be, from their institution, monks and nuns increased so fast, that in the city of Orixa, about 17 years after the death of St. Anthony, there were 20,000 virgins devoted to celibacy. Such at this time was the rage of celibacy, a rage which, however unnatural, will cease to excite our wonder when we consider that it was accounted by both sexes the sure and only infallible road to heaven and eternal happiness; and as such it behoved the Church vigorously to maintain and countenance it, which she did by beginning about this time to deny the liberty of marriage to her sons. In the first Council of Nice, held soon after the introduction of Christianity, the celibacy of the clergy was strenuously argued for, and some think that even in an earlier period it had been the subject of debate. However this be, it was not agreed to in the Council of Nice, though at the end of the 4th century it is said that Syricus, Bishop of Rome, enacted the first decree against the marriage of monks, a decree which was not universally received. For several centuries after, we find that it was not uncommon for clergymen to have wives. Even the popes were allowed this liberty, as it is said in some of the old statutes of the Church that it was lawful for the pope to marry a virgin for the sake of having children. So exceedingly difficult is it to combat against nature, that little regard seems to have been paid to this decree of Syricus, for we are informed that several centuries after it was no uncommon thing for the clergy to have wives, and perhaps even a plurality of them, as we find it among the ordinances of Pope Sylvester that every priest should be the husband of one wife only, and Pius II affirmed that though many strong reasons might be adduced in support of the celibacy of the clergy, there were still stronger reasons against it. Description of the great convent at Ayuda in Rio Janeiro. At the end of the chapel is a large quadrangle entered by a massive gateway, surrounded by 3 stories of grated windows. Here female negro pedlars come with their goods, and expose them in the courtyard below. The nuns, from their grated windows above, see what they like, and letting down a cord, the article is fastened to it. It is then drawn up and examined, and if approved of, the price is let down. Some that I saw in the act of buying and selling in this way were very merry, joking and laughing with the blacks below, and did not seem at all indisposed to do the same with my companion. In 3 of the lower windows, on a level with the courtyard, are revolving cupboards, like half barrels, and at the back of each is a plate of tin, perforated like the top of a nutmeg grater. The nuns of this convent are celebrated for making sweet confectionery, which people purchase. There is a bell which the purchaser applies to, and a nun peeps through the perforated tin. She then lays the dish on a shelf of the revolving cupboard, and turns it inside out. The dish is taken, the price laid in its place, and it is turned in. While we stood there, the invisible lady warder asked for a pinch of snuff. The box was laid down in the same way, and turned in and out. Ceremony of the initiation of a nun. The disposition to take the veil, even among young girls, is not uncommon in Brazil. The opposition of friends can prevent it until they are 25 years old, but after that time they are considered competent to decide for themselves. A writer describes the initiation of a young lady whose wealthy parents were extremely reluctant to have her take the vow. She held a lighted torch in her hand in imitation of the prudent virgins, and when the priest chanted, "Your spouse approaches, come forth and meet him," she approached the altar singing, "I follow with my whole heart," and accompanied by 2 nuns already professed, she knelt before the bishop. She seemed very lovely, with an unusually sweet, gentle, and pensive countenance. She did not look particularly or deeply affected, but when she sung her responses there was something exceedingly mournful in the soft, tremulous, and timid tones of her voice. The bishop now exhorted her to make a public profession of her vows before the congregation, and said, "Will you persevere in your purpose of holy chastity?" She blushed deeply, and with a downcast look, lowly but firmly answered, "I will." He again said more distinctly, "Do you promise to preserve it?" And she replied more emphatically, "I do promise." The bishop then said, "Thanks be to God," and she bent forward and reverently kissed his hand, while he asked her, "Will you be blessed and consecrated?" She replied, "Oh, I wish it." The habiliments, in which she was hereafter to be clothed, were sanctified by the aspersion of holy water. Then followed several prayers to God, that, as he had blessed the garments of Aaron with ointment which flowed from his head to his beard, so he would now bless the garments of his servant with the copious dew of his benediction. When the garment was thus blessed, the girl retired with it, and having laid aside the dress in which she had appeared, she returned arrayed in her new attire, except her veil. A gold ring was next provided, and consecrated with a prayer, that she who wore it might be fortified with celestial virtue, to preserve a pure faith and incorrupt fidelity to her spouse Jesus Christ. He last took the veil, and her female attendants having uncovered her head, he threw it over her, so that it fell on her shoulders and bosom, and said, Receive this sacred veil, under the shadow of which you may learn to despise the world, and submit yourself truly and with all humility of heart to your spouse." To which she sung a response, in a very sweet, soft, and touching voice: "He has placed this veil before my face, that I should see no lover but himself." The bishop now kindly took her hand, and held it while the following hymn was chanted by the choir with great harmony: "Beloved spouse, come, the winter is past, the turtle sings, and the blooming vines are redolent of summer." A crown, a necklace, and other female ornaments were now taken by the bishop and separately blessed, and the girl bending forward, he placed them on her head and neck, praying that she might be thought worthy to be enrolled into the society of the 144,000 virgins who preserved their chastity and did not mix with the society of impure women. Last of all, he placed the ring on the middle finger of her right hand, and solemnly said: "So I marry you to Jesus, who will henceforth be your protector. Receive this ring, the pledge of your faith, that you may be called the spouse of God." She fell on her knees and sung: "I am married to him whom angels serve, whose beauty the sun and moon admire." Then, rising, and showing with exultation her right hand, she said emphatically, as if to impress it on the attention of the congregation: "My Lord has wedded me with this ring, and decorated me with a crown as his spouse. I here renounce and despise all earthly ornaments for his sake, whom alone I see, whom alone I love, in whom alone I trust, and to whom alone I give all my affections. My heart hath uttered a good word. I speak of the deed I have done for my king." The bishop then pronounced a general benediction, and retired up to the altar, while the nun professed was borne off between her friends with lighted tapers and garlands waving. End of Section 16.
Section 17 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Summer Days. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Wedded love is infinitely preferable to variety. Hail, wedded love, mysterious law, true source of human offspring, sole propriety, in paradise of all things common else. By thee, adulterous lust was driven from men, among the bestial herds to range. By thee, founded in reason, loyal, just and pure, relations dear, and all the charities of father, son, and brother first were known. Thou art the fountain of domestic sweets, whose bed is undefiled and chaste pronounced. Here love his golden shafts employs, here lights his constant lamp, and waves his purple wings, reigns here and revels. Not in the bought smile of harlots, loveless, joyless, unendeared, casual fruition, nor in court amours, mixed dance, or wanton mask, or midnight ball, or serenade, which the starved lover sings to his proud fair, best quitted with disdain. Italian debauchery. If chastity is none of the most shining virtues of the French, it is still less so of the Italians. Almost all the travellers who have visited Italy agree in describing it as the most abandoned of all the countries of Europe. At Venice, at Naples, and indeed in almost every part of Italy, women are taught from their infancy the various arts of alluring to their arms the young and unwary, and of obtaining from them, while heated by love or wine, everything that flattery and false smiles can obtain in those unguarded moments. And so little infamous is the trade of prostitution, and so venal the women, that hardly any rank or condition set them above being bribed to it. Nay, they are frequently assisted by their male friends and acquaintances to drive a good bargain. Nor does their career of debauchery finish with their unmarried state. The vows of fidelity which they make at the altar are like the vows and oaths made upon too many other occasions, only considered as nugatory forms, which law has obliged them to take, but custom absolved them from performing. They even claim and enjoy greater liberties after marriage than before. Every married woman has a chichis bey, or gallant, who attends her to all public places, hands her in and out of her carriage, picks up her gloves or fan, and 1,000 other little offices of the same natures. But this is only his public employment, as a reward for which he is entitled to have the lady as often as he pleases, at a place of retirement sacred to themselves, where no person, not even the most intrusive husband, must enter, to be witness of what passes between them. This has been considered by people of other nations as a custom not altogether consistent with chastity and purity of manners. The Italians themselves, however, endeavor to justify it in their conversations with strangers, and Baretti has of late years published a formal vindication of it to the world. In this vindication he has not only deduced the original of it from pure platonic love, but would willingly persuade us that it is still continued upon the same mental principles. A doctrine which the world will hardly be credulous enough to swallow, even though he should offer more convincing arguments to support it than he has already done. Naked fakirs. So different over all the world are the sects of saints as well as of sinners, that besides the Brahmins, a set of innocent and religious priests, who have rendered their women virtuous by treating them with kindness and humanity, there are another sect of religio-philosophical drones called fakirs, who contribute as much as they can to debauch the sex, under a pretense of superior sanctity. These hypocritical saints, like some of the ridiculous sects which formerly existed in Europe, wear no clothes, considering them only as proper appendages to sinners, who are ashamed because they are sensible of guilt, while they, being free from every stain of pollution, have no shame to cover. In this original state of nature, these idle and pretended devotees assemble together sometimes in armies of 10 or 12,000, and under a pretense of going in pilgrimage to certain temples, like locusts, devour everything on their way, the men flying before them and carrying all that they can out of the reach of their depredations, while the women, not in the least afraid of a naked army of lusty saints, throw themselves in their way, or remain quietly at home to receive them. It has long been an opinion well established all over India, that there is not in nature so powerful a remedy for removing the sterility of women as the prayers of these sturdy naked saints. On this account, barren women constantly apply to them for assistance, which when the good-natured fakir has an indication to grant, he leaves his slipper or his staff at the door of the lady's apartment with whom he is praying, a symbol so sacred that it effectually prevents anyone from violating the secrecy of their devotion. But should he forget the signal, and at the same time be distant from the protection of his brethren, a sound drubbing is frequently the reward of his pious endeavors. But though they venture sometimes in Hindostan to treat a fakir in this unholy manner in other parts of Asia and Africa, such is the veneration in which these lusty saints are held, that they not only have access when they please to perform private devotions with barren women, but are accounted so holy that they may, at any time, in public or private, confer a personal favor upon a woman, without bringing upon her either shame or guilt, and no woman dare refuse to gratify their passion. Nor, indeed, has anyone an inclination of this kind, because she, upon whom this personal favor has been conferred, is considered by herself and by all the people as having been sanctified and made more holy by the action. So much concerning the conduct of the fakirs in debauching women seems certain. But it is by travelers further related that wherever they find a woman who is exceedingly handsome, they carry her off privately to one of their temples, but in such a manner as to make her and the people believe that she is carried away by the god who is there worshipped, who, being violently in love with her, took that method to procure her for his wife. This done, they perform a nuptial ceremony, and make her further believe that she is married to the god, when, in reality, she is only married to one of the fakirs who personates him. Women who are treated in this manner are revered by the people as the wives of the god, and by that stratagem secured solely to the fakirs, who have cunning enough to impose themselves as gods upon some of these women through the whole of their lives. In countries where reason is stronger than superstition, we almost think this impossible. Where the contrary is the case, there is nothing too hard to be credited. Something like this was done by the priests of ancient Greece and Rome, and a few centuries ago tricks of the same nature were practiced by the monks and other libertines upon some of the visionary and enthusiastic women of Europe. Hence we need not think it strange if the fakirs generally succeed in attempts of this nature, when we consider that they only have to deceive a people brought up in the most consummate ignorance, and that nothing can be more flattering to a female vanity than for a woman to suppose herself such a peculiar favorite of the divinity she worships as to be chosen from all her companions to the honor of being admitted to his embraces, a favor which her self-admiration will dispose her more readily to believe than examine. Mahometan plurality of wives. But it is not the religion of the Hindus only that is unfavorable to chastity. That of Mohammed, which now prevails over a great part of India, is unfavorable to it likewise. Mahometanism everywhere indulges men with a plurality of wives, while it ties down the women to the strictest conjugal fidelity. Hence, while the men riot in unlimited variety, the women are in great numbers confined to share among them the scanty favors of one man only. This unnatural and impolitic conduct induces them to seek by art and intrigue what they are denied by the laws of their prophet. As polygamy prevails over all Asia, this art and intrigue follow as the consequence of it. Some have imagined that it is the result of climate, but it rather appears to be the result of the injustice which women suffer by polygamy. For it seems to reign, as much in Constantinople and in every other place where polygamy is in fashion, as it does on the banks of the Ganges or the Indus. The famous Montesquieu, whose system was that the passions are entirely regulated by the climate, brings as proof of this system a story from the collection of voyages for the establishment of an East India Company, in which it is said that at Patan, "the wanton desires of their women are so outrageous that the men are obliged to make use of a certain apparel to shelter them from their designs." Were this story really true, it would be but a partial proof of the effect of the climate, for why should the burning suns of Patan only influence the passions of the fair? Why should they there transport that sex beyond decency, which in all other climates is the most decent, and leave in so cool and defensive a state that sex which in all other climates is apt to be the most offensive and indecent? To whatever length the spirit of intrigue may be carried in Asia and Africa, however the passions of the women may prompt them to excite desire, and to throw themselves in the way of gratification, we have the strongest reasons to reprobate all these stories, which would make us believe that they are so lost to decency as to attack the other sex. Such a system would be overturning nature and inverting the established laws by which she governs the world. End of section 17. Recording by Summer Days. Section 18 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Summer Days. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Women of Otaheite. In Otaheite, an island in the Southern Ocean, we are presented with women of a singular character. As far as we can recollect, we think it is a pretty general rule that whatever the sex are accustomed to be constantly clothed, they are ashamed to appear naked. Those of Otaheite seem, however, to be an exception to this rule. To show themselves in public, with or without clothing, appears to be to them a matter of equal indifference, and the exposition of any part of their bodies is not attended with the least backwardness or reluctance. Circumstances from which we may reasonably infer that among them clothes were not originally invented to cover shame, but either as ornaments or as a defense against the cold. But a still more striking singularity in the character of these women, and which distinguishes them not only from the females of all other nations, but likewise from those of almost all other animals, is their performing in public those rites which in almost every other part of the globe are performed in privacy and retirement. Whether this is the effect of innocence, or of a dissoluteness of manners to which no other people have yet arrived, remains still to be discovered. That they are dissolute, even beyond anything we have hitherto recorded, is but too certain. As polygamy is not allowed among them, to satisfy the lust of variety, they have a society called Arioi, in which every woman is common to every man, and when any of these women happens to have a child, it is smothered in the moment of its birth, that it may not interrupt the pleasures of its infamous mother. But in this juncture, should nature relent at so horrid a deed, even then the mother is not allowed to save her child unless she can find a man who will patronize it as a father, in which case the man is considered as having appropriated the woman to himself, and she is accordingly extruded from this hopeful society. These few anecdotes sufficiently characterize the women of this island. Crim-Con of Claudia and Pompeia. Our own times furnish us with an instance of a ceremony from which all women are carefully excluded, that is, masonry. But the Roman ladies, in performing the rites sacred to the good goddess, were even more afraid of the men than our masons are of women. For we are told by some authors that so cautious were they of concealment, that even the statues and pictures of men and other male animals were hoodwinked with a thick veil. The house of the consul, though commonly so large that they might have been perfectly secured against all intrusion in some remote apartment of it, was obliged to be evacuated by all male animals, and even the consul himself was not suffered to remain in it. Before they began their ceremonies, every corner and lurking place in the house was carefully searched, and no caution omitted to prevent all possibility of being discovered by impertinent curiosity, or disturbed by presumptive intrusion. But these cautions were not all the guard that was placed around them. The laws of the Romans made it death for any man to be present at the solemnity. Such being the precautions, and such the penalties for ensuring the secrecy of the ceremony, it was only once attempted to be violated, though it existed from the foundation of the Roman Empire till the introduction of Christianity, and this attempt was made, not so much perhaps with a view to be present at the ceremony, as to fulfill an assignation with a mistress. Pompeia, the wife of Caesar, having been suspected of a criminal correspondence with Claudius, and so closely watched that she could find no opportunity of gratifying her passion, at last, by the means of a female slave, settled an assignation with him at the celebration of the rites of the good goddess. Claudius was directed to come in the habit of a singing girl, a character he could easily personate, being young and of a fair complexion. As soon as the slave saw him enter, she ran to inform her mistress. The mistress, eager to meet her lover, immediately left the company and threw herself into his arms, but could not be prevailed upon him to return so soon as he thought necessary for their mutual safety. Upon which he left her, and began to take a walk through the rooms, always avoiding the light as much as possible. While he was thus walking by himself, a maidservant accosted him, and desired him to sing. He took no notice of her, but she followed, and urging him so closely, that he was at last obliged to speak. His voice betrayed his sex. The maidservant shrieked, and running into the room where the rites were performing, told that a man was in the house. The women, in the utmost consternation, threw a veil over the mysteries, ordered the doors to be secured, and with lights in their hands, ran about the house searching for the sacrilegious intruder. They found him in the apartment of the slave who had admitted him, drove him out with ignominy, and though it was in the middle of the night, immediately dispersed to give an account to their husbands of what had happened. Claudius was soon after accused of having profaned the holy rites, but the populace declaring in his favor, the judges, fearing an insurrection, were obliged to acquit him. A word to a very nice class of ladies. There is amongst us a female character, not uncommon, which we denominate the outrageously virtuous. Women of this stamp never fail to seize all opportunities of exclaiming, in the bitterest manner, against every one upon whom even the slightest suspicion of indiscretion or unchastity has fallen, taking care as they go along to magnify every molehill into a mountain, and every thoughtless freedom into the blackest of crimes. But besides the illiberality of thus treating such as may frequently be innocent, you may credit us, dear countrywomen, when we aver, that such a behavior, instead of making you appear more virtuous, only draws down upon you, by those who know the world, suspicions not much to your advantage. Your sex are in general suspected by ours of being too much addicted to scandal and defamation, a suspicion which has not arisen of late years, as we find in the ancient laws of England a punishment, known by the name of ducking stool, annexed to scolding and defamation in the women, though no such punishment nor crime is taken notice of in the men. This crime, however, we persuade ourselves, you are less guilty of than is commonly believed. But there is another of a nature not more excusable, from which we cannot so much exculpate you, which is, that harsh and forbidding appearance you put on, and that ill treatment, which you no doubt think necessary for the illustration of your own virtue, you should bestow on every one of your sex who has deviated from the path of rectitude. A behavior of this nature, besides being so opposite to that meek and gentle spirit which should distinguish female nature, is in every respect contrary to the charitable and forgiving temper of the Christian religion, and infallibly shuts the door of repentance against an unfortunate sister, willing, perhaps, to abandon the vices into which heedless advertency had plunged her, and from which none of you can promise yourselves an absolute security. We wish not, fair countrywomen, like the declaimer and satirist, to paint you all vice and imperfection, nor, like the venal panegyrist, to exhibit you all virtue. As impartial historians, we confess that you have, in the present age, many virtues and good qualities, which were either nearly or altogether unknown to your ancestors. But do you not also exceed them in some follies and vices also? Is not the levity, dissipation, and extravagance of the women of this century arrived to a pitch unknown and unheard of in former times? Is not the course which you steer in life almost entirely directed by vanity and fashion? And are there not too many of you who, throwing aside reason and good conduct, and despising the counsel of your friends and relations, seem determined to follow the mode of the world, however it may be mixed with vice? Do not the generality of you dress and appear above your station, and are not many of you ashamed to be seen performing the duties of it? To sum up all, do not too many of you act as if you thought the care of the family, and the other domestic virtues, beneath your attention, and that the sole end for which you were sent into the world was to please and divert yourselves, at the expense of those poor wretches the men, whom you consider as obliged to support you in every kind of idleness and extravagance. While such is your conduct, and while the contagion is every day increasing, you are not to be surprised if the men, still fond of you as playthings in the hours of mirth and revelry, ever shun serious connection with you, and while they wish to be possessed of your charms, are so much afraid of your manners and conduct that they prefer the cheerless state of a bachelor to the numberless evils arising from being tied to a modern wife. End of section 18. Recording by Summer Days.
Section 16 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Custom in the Mogul Empire. In a variety of parts of the Mogul Empire, when the women are carried abroad, they are put into a kind of machine like a chariot, and placed on the backs of camels, or in covered sedan chairs, and surrounded by a guard of eunuchs and armed men, in such a manner that a stranger would rather suppose the cavalcade to be carrying some desperate villain to execution, than employed to prevent the intrigues or escape of a defenceless woman. At home, the sex are covered with gauze veils, which they dare not take off in the presence of any man, except their husband, or some near relation. Over the greatest part of Asia, and some parts of Africa, women are guarded by eunuchs, made incapable of violating their chastity. In Spain, where the natives are the descendants of the Africans, and whose jealousy is not less strong than that of their ancestors, they, for many centuries, made use of padlocks to secure the chastity of their women, but finding these ineffectual, they frequently had recourse to old women, called gouvernantes. It had been discovered that men deprived of their virility did not guard female virtue so strictly as to be incapable of being bribed to allow another a taste of those pleasures they themselves were incapable of enjoying. The Spaniards, sensible of this, imagined that vindictive old women were more likely to be incorruptible, as envy would stimulate them to prevent the young from enjoying those pleasures which they themselves had no longer any chance for, But all-powerful gold soon overcame even this obstacle, and the Spaniards at present seem to give up all restrictive methods, and to trust the virtue of their women to good principles, instead of rigor and hard usage. Custom of the Muscovites. If the laws forbidding the marriage of near relations with each other originated from the political view of preserving the human race from degeneracy, they are the only laws we meet with on that subject, and exert almost the only care we find taken of so important a matter. The Asiatic is careful to improve the breed of his elephants, the Arabian of his horses, and the Laplander of his reindeer. The Englishman, eager to have swift horses, staunch dogs, and victorious cocks, grudges no care and spares no expense, to have the males and females matched properly. But since the days of Solon, where is the legislator, or since the days of the ancient Greeks, where are the private persons who take any care to improve, or even to keep from degeneracy, the breed of their own species? The Englishman who solicitously attends the training of his colts and puppies would be ashamed to be caught in the nursery; and while no motive could prevail upon him to breed horses or hounds from an improper or contaminated kind, he will calmly, or rather inconsiderately, match himself with the most decrepit or diseased of the human species. Thoughtless of the weaknesses and evils he is going to entail on posterity, and considering nothing but the acquisition of fortune he is by her alliance to convey to an offspring, by diseases rendered unable to use it. The Muscovites were formerly the only people, besides the Greeks, who paid a proper attention to this subject. After the preliminaries of a marriage were settled between the parents of a young couple, the bride was stripped naked and carefully examined by a jury of matrons, when if they found any bodily defect, they endeavored to cure it; but if it would admit of no remedy, the match was broke off, and she was considered not only as a very improper subject to breed from, but improper also for maintaining the affections of a husband, after he had discovered the imposition she had put upon him. Sale of children to purchase wives. In Timor, an island in the Indian Ocean, it is said that parents sell their children in order to purchase more wives. In Circassia, women are reared and improved in beauty and every alluring art, only for the purpose of being sold. The prince of the Circassians demanded of the prince of Mingrelia 100 slaves loaded with tapestry, 100 cows, as many oxen, and the same number of horses, as the price of his sister. In New Zealand we meet with a custom which may be called purchasing a wife for a night, and which is proof that those must also be purchased who are intended for a longer duration. And what to us is a little surprising, this temporary wife insisted upon being treated with as much deference and respect as if she had been married for life. But in general this is not the case in other countries, for the wife who is purchased is always trained up in the principles of slavery, and, being inured to every indignity and mortification from her parents, she expects no better treatment from her husband. There is little difference in the condition of her who is put to sale by her sordid parents, and her who is disposed of in the same manner by the magistrates, as a part of the state's property. Besides those we have already mentioned in this work, the Thracians put the fairest of their virgins up to public sale, and the magistrates of Crete had the sole power of choosing partners in marriage for their young men; and, in the execution of this power, the affection and interest of the parties was totally overlooked, and the good of the state the only object of attention; in pursuing which, they always allotted the strongest and best made of the sex to one another, that they might raise up a generation of warriors, or of women fit to be mothers of warriors. Polygamy and concubinage. Polygamy and concubinage having in process of time become fashionable vices, the number of women kept by the great became at last more an article of grandeur and state than a mode of satisfying the animal appetite. Solomon had 80 queens, and 80 concubines, and virgins without number. Maimon tells us, that among the Jews a man might have as many wives as he pleased, even to the number of 100, and that it was not in their power to prevent him, provided he could maintain and pay them all the conjugal debt once a week; but in this duty he was not to run in arrear to any of them above a month, though with regard to concubines he might do as he pleased. It would be an endless task to enumerate all the nations which practiced polygamy. We shall, therefore, only mention a few, where the practice seemed to vary something from the common method. The ancient Sapiens were not only said to have had a plurality, but even a community of wives; a thing strongly inconsistent with that spirit of jealousy which prevails among men in most countries where polygamy is allowed. The ancient Germans were so strict monogamists, that they reckoned it a species of polygamy for a woman to marry a second husband even after the death of the first. "A woman," they say, "has but one life, and but one body, therefore should have but one husband." And besides, they added, "that she who knows she is never to have a second husband will the more value and endeavor to promote the happiness and preserve the life of the first." Among the Heruli this idea was carried farther; a woman was obliged to strangle herself at the death of her husband, lest she should afterwards marry another. So detestable was polygamy in the north, while in the east it was one of those rites which they most of all others esteem, and maintain with such inflexible firmness, that it will probably be one of the last of those that it will wrest out of their hands. The Egyptians, it is probable, did not allow of polygamy, and as the Greeks borrowed their institutions from them, it was also forbid by the laws of Cecrops, though concubinage seems either to have been allowed or overlooked; for in the Odyssey of Homer we find Ulysses declaring himself to be the son of a concubine, which he would probably not have done, had any degree of infamy been annexed to it. In some cases, however, polygamy was allowed in Greece, from a mistaken notion that it would increase population. The Athenians, once thinking the number of their citizens diminished, decreed that it should be lawful for a man to have children by another woman as well as by his wife. Besides this, particular instances occur of some who have transgressed the law of monogamy. Euripides is said to have had 2 wives, who, by their constant disagreement, gave him a dislike to the whole sex; a supposition which receives some weight from these lines of his in Andromache: "Ne'er will I commend more beds, more wives than one, nor children cursed with double mothers, banes and plagues of life." Socrates too had 2 wives, but the poor culprit had as much reason to repent of his temerity as Euripides. Eunuchs. As the appetite towards the other sex is one of the strongest and most ungovernable in our nature, as it intrudes itself more than any other into our thoughts, and frequently diverts them from every other purpose or employment, it may at first, on this account, have been reckoned criminal when it interfered with worship and devotion, and emasculation was made use of in order to get rid of it, which may, perhaps, have been the origin of eunuchs. But however this be, it is certain that there were men of various religions who made themselves incapable of procreation on a religious account, as we are told that the priests of Cybele constantly castrated themselves; and by our Saviour, that there are eunuchs who make themselves such for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Girls sold at auction. The ancient Assyrians seem more thoroughly to have settled and digested the affairs of marriage than any of their contemporaries. Once in every year they assembled together all the girls that were marriageable, when the public crier put them up to sale, one after another. For her whose figure was agreeable, and whose beauty was attracting, the rich strove against each other, who should give the highest price; which price was put into a public stock, and distributed in portions to those whom nobody would accept without a reward. After the most beautiful were disposed of, these were also put up by the crier, and a certain sum of money offered with each, proportioned to what it was thought she stood in need of to bribe a husband to accept her. When a man offered to accept of any of them, on the terms upon which she was exposed to sale, the crier proclaimed that such a man had proposed to take such a woman, with such a sum of money along with her, provided none could be found who would take her with less; and in this manner the sale went on, till she was at last allotted to him who offered to take her with the smallest portion. When this public sale was over, the purchasers of those that were beautiful were not allowed to take them away till they had paid down the price agreed on, and given sufficient security that they would marry them; nor, on the other hand, would those who were to have a premium for accepting of such as were less beautiful take a delivery of them till their portions were previously paid. Sale of a wife. In England, the sale of a wife sometimes occurs, even at the present day, of which the following is an example, from the Lancaster Herald. Sale of a wife at Carlisle. The inhabitants of this city lately witnessed the sale of a wife by her husband, Joseph Thompson, who resides in a small village about 3 miles distant, and rents a farm of about 42 or 44 acres. She was a spruce, lively, buxom damsel, apparently not exceeding 22 years of age, and appeared to feel a pleasure at the exchange she was about to make. They had no children during their union, and that, with some family disputes, caused them by mutual agreement to come to the resolution of finally parting. Accordingly, the bellman was sent round to give public notice of the sale, which was to take place at 12 o'clock, and this announcement attracted the notice of thousands. She appeared above the crowd, standing on a large oak chair, surrounded by many of her friends, with a rope or halter made of straw round her neck, being dressed in rather a fashionable country style, and appearing to some advantage. The husband, who was also standing in an elevated position near her, proceeded to put her up for sale, and spoke nearly as follows: "Gentlemen, I have to offer to your notice my wife, Mary Ann Thompson, otherwise Williamson, whom I mean to sell to the highest and fairest bidder. It is her wish as well as mine to part forever. I took her for my comfort, and the good of my house, but she has become my tormentor and a domestic curse, etc., etc. Now I have shown you her faults and failings, I will explain her qualifications and goodness. She can read fashionable novels, and milk cows. She can laugh and weep with the same ease that you can take a glass of ale. She can make butter, and scold the maid. She can sing Moor's melodies, and plait her frills and caps. She cannot make rum, gin, or whiskey, but she is a good judge of their quality from long experience in tasting them. I therefore offer her, with all her perfections and imperfections, for the sum of 50 shillings. After an hour or two, she was purchased by Henry Mears, a pensioner, for the sum of 20 shillings and a Newfoundland dog. The happy pair immediately left town together, amidst the shouts and huzzas of the multitude, in which they were joined by Thompson, who, with the greatest good humour imaginable, proceeded to put the halter, which his wife had taken off, round the neck of his Newfoundland dog, and then proceeded to the first public house, where he spent the remainder of the day. End of Section 19. Recording by Trisha G.
Section 20 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Section 20. Punishment of Adultery. As fidelity to the marriage bed, especially on the part of women, has always been considered as one of the most essential duties of matrimony, wise legislators, in order to secure that benefit, have annexed punishment to the act of adultery. These punishments, however, have generally some reference to the manner in which the wives were acquired, and to the value stamped upon woman by civilization and politeness of manners. It is ordered by the Mosaic Code that both the men and the women taken in adultery shall be stoned to death, whence it would seem that no more latitude was given to the male than to the female. But this is not the case. Such an unlimited power of concubinage was given to the men, that we may suppose him highly licentious indeed who could not be satisfied therewith, without committing adultery. The Egyptians, among whom women were greatly esteemed, had a singular method of punishing adulterers of both sexes. They cut off the privy parts of the man, that he might never be able to debauch another woman, and the nose of the woman, that she might never be the object of temptation to another man. Punishments nearly of the same nature, and perhaps nearly about the same time, were instituted in the East Indies against adulterers. But while those of the Egyptians originated from a love of virtue and of their women, those of the Hindus probably arose from jealousy and revenge. It is ordered by the Shaster that if a man commit adultery with a woman of superior caste, he shall be put to death. If by force he commit adultery with a woman of an equal or inferior caste, the magistrate shall confiscate all his possessions, cut off his genitals, and cause him to be carried round the city mounted on an ass. If by fraud he commit adultery with a woman of an equal or inferior caste, the magistrate shall take his possessions, brand him on the forehead, and banish him the kingdom. Such are the laws of the Shaster, so far as they regard all the superior castes except the Brahmins. But if any of the most inferior castes commit adultery with a woman of the castes greatly superior, he is not only to be dismembered, but tied to a hot iron plate and burnt to death. Whereas the highest castes may commit adultery with the very lowest for the most trifling fine, and a Brahmin or priest can only suffer by having the hair of his head cut off, and like the clergy of Europe, while under the dominion of the Pope, he cannot be put to death for any crime whatever. But the laws, of which he is always the interpreter, are not so favourable to his wife. They inflict a severe disgrace upon her if she commit adultery with any of the higher castes, but if with the lowest, the magistrate shall cut off her hair, anoint her body with ghee, and cause her to be carried through the whole city naked, and riding upon an ass, and shall cast her out on the north side of the city, or cause her to be eaten by dogs. If a woman of any other castes goes to a man, and entices him to have a criminal correspondence with her, the magistrate shall cut off her ears, lips, and nose, mount her upon an ass, and drown her, or throw her to the dogs. To the commission of adultery with a dancing girl or prostitute no punishment nor fine is annexed. Anecdote of Caesar. When Caesar had subdued all his competitors, and most of the foreign nations which made war against him, he found that so many Romans had been destroyed in the quarrels in which he had often engaged them, that to repair the loss, he promised rewards to fathers of families, and forbade all Romans who were above 20 and under 40 years of age to go out of their native country. Augustus, his successor, to check the debauchery of the Roman youth, laid heavy taxes upon such as continued unmarried after a certain age, and encouraged with great rewards the procreation of lawful children. Some years afterwards, the Roman knights having pressingly petitioned him that he would relax the severity of that law, he ordered their whole body to assemble before him, and the married and unmarried to arrange themselves in 2 separate parties, when, observing the unmarried to be much the greater company, he first addressed those who had complied with this law, telling them that they alone had served the purposes of nature and society, that the human race was created, male and female, to prevent the extinction of the species, and that marriage was contrived as the most proper method of renewing the children of that species. He added that they alone deserved the name of men and fathers, and that he would prefer them to such offices as they might transmit to their posterity. Then, turning to the bachelors, he told them that he knew not by what name to call them, nor by that of men, for they had done nothing that was manly, nor by that of citizens, since the city might perish for them, nor by that of Romans, for they seemed determined to let the race and name become extinct, but by whatever name he called them, their crime, he said, equalled all other crimes put together, for they were guilty of murder, in not suffering those to be born who should proceed from them, of impiety, in abolishing the names and honours of their fathers and ancestors, of sacrilege, in destroying their species and human nature, which owed its original to the gods, and was consecrated to them, that by leading a single life they overturned, as far as in them lay, the temples and altars of the gods, dissolved the government by disobeying its laws, betrayed their country by making it barren. Having ended his speech, he doubled the rewards and privileges of such as had children, and laid a heavy fine on all unmarried persons by reviving the Poppæan law. Though by this law all the males above a certain age were obliged to marry under a severe penalty, Augustus allowed them the space of a full year to comply with its demands. But such was the backwardness to matrimony and perversity of the Roman knights, and others, that every possible method was taken to evade the penalty inflicted upon them, and some of them even married children in the cradle for that purpose. Thus fulfilling the letter, they avoided the spirit of the law, and though actually married, had no restraint upon their licentiousness, nor any encumbrance by the expense of a family. Power of marrying. Among nations which had shaken off the authority of the Church of Rome, the priests still retained almost an exclusive power of joining men and women together in marriage. This appears rather, however, to have been by the tacit consent of the civil power, than from any defect in its right and authority. For in the time of Oliver Cromwell marriages were solemnized frequently by the justices of the peace, and the clergy neither attempted to invalidate them, nor make the children proceeding from them illegitimate. And when the province of New England was first settled, one of the earliest laws of the colony was that the power of marrying should belong to the magistrates. How different was the case with the first French settlers in Canada! For many years a priest had not been seen in the country, and a magistrate could not marry. The consequence was natural. Men and women joined themselves together as husband and wife, trusting to the vows and promises of each other. Father Charlevoix, a Jesuit, at last travelled into those wild regions, found many of the simple, innocent inhabitants living in that manner, with all of whom he found much fault, enjoined them to do penance, and afterwards married them. After the Restoration, the power of marrying again reverted to the clergy. The magistrate, however, had not entirely resigned his right to that power, but it was, by a late act of Parliament, entirely surrendered to them, and a penalty annexed to the solemnization of it by any other person whatsoever. End of Section 20.